A lonely cry echoed across the desolate prairie as Tabitha Ashcroft collapsed to her knees before the small mound of freshly turned earth, her tears falling like rain upon the unmarked grave of a child she would never know. Wyoming Territory, 1876, had taken everything from her husband, her dreams, and now the stillborn babe she'd carried for 9 long months beneath her heart. The sun was setting across the vast Wyoming landscape, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and pink that seemed to mock her grief with their beauty. 6 months ago, Tabitha had arrived with her husband William, full of hope for their new life at the homestead. 3 months later, she had buried him after a terrible accident while clearing land. Now, she had buried their child, a daughter who never drew breath. "My baby," Tabitha whispered, her voice breaking as she pressed her hands against the soil. "I never even held you. They took you away so quickly." The midwife had whisked the silent infant away, muttering about sparing her the pain, but Tabitha had longed to cradle her child just once, to memorize her face before saying goodbye. "Madam, you shouldn't be out here alone." The deep voice startled her, and she turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. As he moved closer, she could make out his features' strong jaw, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a weathered Stetson pulled low on his forehead. "Please leave me," she replied, wiping at her tears with dirt-stained hands. "This is private mourning. It'll be dark soon. Not safe for a woman alone." He dismounted from his horse with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Ethan Parker, madam. I work the Triple R just over that ridge." He gestured vaguely to the east. "Notice the fresh digging from up on the hill." "My daughter," Tabitha said simply, her voice hollow. Ethan removed his hat and held it against his chest, revealing thick brown hair touched with hints of gold from long days under the sun. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss." Something about his sincerity made her tears flow anew. "I never even held her," Tabitha confessed, the words tearing from her throat. "She was so small, so perfect, but she never cried. They said it was better I didn't see her, but how will I remember her face when I'm old? How will I know what she looked like when I join her someday?" Ethan knelt beside her, not too close, respecting her space even as he offered comfort. "She wept for her baby she never held," he murmured, almost to himself. Then he looked at her with eyes that somehow understood grief. "Then hold on to me instead." He offered his arm, strong and steady. Tabitha stared at him, ready to refuse to send him away, but the genuine compassion in his expression broke through her walls. With a sob, she leaned into him, allowing a stranger's strength to shore up her crumbling world. "I've got a wagon," Ethan said softly after her tears had subsided somewhat. "Let me take you home before the night animals come out." Home. The word felt hollow now. The small cabin she and William had built together was just a shell without her family to fill it. Still, she nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. The ride back to her homestead was silent except for the creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Tabitha sat rigidly beside Ethan, wondering at herself for accepting help from a man she didn't know. But there was something trustworthy in his quiet presence, something that soothed her raw edges. When they reached her cabin, he helped her down from the wagon with gentle hands. "You got anyone staying with you, Mrs. Ashcroft?" "Tabitha Ashcroft. And no, I'm alone now. My husband passed 3 months ago." Ethan's expression darkened. "You've had more than your share of sorrows, Mrs. Ashcroft." He looked around at the half-finished corral, the small garden wilting from neglect, the stack of lumber that would never become the barn William had planned. "How are you managing?" "I'm not," she admitted, too exhausted for pretense. "But I'll leave soon. Return east to my sister in Boston." He nodded, then glanced toward the horizon where the last light was fading. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on you if that's all right. Bring some supplies." Tabitha wanted to refuse, to tell him she needed no one's charity, but the truth was she was barely surviving. "Thank you, Mr. Parker." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Get some rest, Mrs. Ashcroft." "Tabitha," she replied, surprised at herself. He tipped his hat, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, before he climbed back into his wagon and turned the horses toward home. That night, Tabitha slept deeply for the first time since losing her child. Her dreams filled not with the usual nightmares, but with the comforting presence of a man with kind eyes and strong, gentle hands. True to his word, Ethan returned the next day with a wagon loaded with supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salted meat, and even some fresh vegetables from his own garden. "Just to tide you over," he explained when she protested, "until you decide what's next." Over the following weeks, he came regularly, helping with chores that were beyond her strength: fixing the leaky roof, mending the chicken coop, harvesting what could be saved from her neglected garden. He never stayed long, never presumed upon her hospitality, but his visits became the anchor points around which Tabitha structured her days. One afternoon in late August, Ethan arrived to find Tabitha standing in the yard, staring at the pile of lumber that was to have been the barn. The summer sun had baked the land to a golden brown, and dust swirled around her skirts in the hot breeze. "Something on your mind?" he asked, setting down the toolbox he'd brought. "I was just thinking how William never got to build his barn." She touched one of the planks, weathered now from exposure. "He had such plans for this place." "It's good land," Ethan agreed, surveying the rolling acres that stretched toward the distant mountains. "Be a shame to let it go to waste." Tabitha looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Ethan scratched the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. "Just that. If you're staying, I could help you get it running proper. If you're not, well, you should get a fair price for it at least. You think I should stay?" The thought had been forming in her mind these past weeks, but she'd been afraid to examine it too closely. "I think you should do what brings you peace, Tabitha." It was the first time he'd used her given name without the formality of Mrs. Ashcroft, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She looked around at the land that had claimed so much from her. "I don't know if I can find peace here. Too many ghosts." "Sometimes," Ethan said carefully, "we honor those we've lost by living the life they'd have wanted for us." His words struck something deep inside her. William had loved this land fiercely, had dreamed of building a legacy here. And the daughter she'd never held, what would she have wanted for her mother? "Help me build the barn," Tabitha said suddenly, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Show me how to make this work." Ethan's face broke into a smile that transformed his weather-beaten features, making him look younger, almost boyish. "Yes, madam, I believe I can do that." They began work on the barn the very next day. Ethan brought 2 men from the RRR to help, with the foreman's blessing. Tabitha tried to pay them, but they refused, saying neighbors helped neighbors in Wyoming. It was the first time she'd felt truly part of this harsh, beautiful country. As summer faded into fall, the barn took shape, and with it, Tabitha's resolve to stay strengthened. Ethan taught her about ranching, how to mend fences, care for livestock, and read the weather in the shape of the clouds. She discovered she had a talent for animal husbandry, particularly with horses. The mare William had bought her, Beauty, foaled in September, and Tabitha delivered the colt herself with Ethan's guidance. "You've got a touch with them," he observed as she coaxed the wobbly-legged colt to nurse for the first time. "Not everyone does." Tabitha stroked the colt's velvety muzzle, smiling at the tickle of whiskers against her palm. "I've named him Hope," she said softly. Ethan's eyes met hers over the stall door. Good name. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, Tabitha found herself looking forward more and more to Ethan's visits. They would often sit by the fire after a day's work, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on his father's ranch in Texas, about the war that had taken his brother, about his dreams of someday having a place of his own. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her courtship with William, the excitement and terror of venturing west. And gradually, she found herself able to speak about her baby without feeling like her heart would shatter. "I think she would have had William's eyes," she told Ethan one evening as they shelled peas at her kitchen table. "They were the most remarkable blue, like the sky just after sunset." "She'd have been beautiful," Ethan agreed softly. "Like her mama." Tabitha felt a blush rise to her cheeks and busied herself with the peas. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as a woman, not just a widow, not just a grieving mother. The realization that she found Ethan attractive was both thrilling and terrifying. The first snow fell in early November, a light dusting that turned the world pristine and hushed. Ethan arrived that morning with a load of firewood and found Tabitha outside, her face turned up to catch the flakes on her cheeks. "Been a while since you've seen snow?" he asked, amusement warming his voice. "It's different here," she explained. "In Boston, it gets dirty so quickly. Here it's perfect." "Not when it's 6 feet deep and your cattle are freezing," he countered, but his eyes were kind. "Winter out here isn't gentle, Tabitha." "Neither am I, not anymore." She straightened her shoulders. "I've survived worse than snow." Something flickered in his expression, respect, admiration, perhaps something more. "Yes, you have at that." He cleared his throat. "Listen, there's a harvest dance in town this weekend, sort of the last hurrah before winter sets in proper. Would you? That is, I'd be honored if you'd accompany me." Tabitha's breath caught. This was more than neighborly help, more than friendship. This was stepping into something new, something that both beckoned and frightened her. "I haven't danced since—" "I know," he said gently. "Too soon, maybe. Forget I know," she interrupted. "I'd like to go." "With you." The smile that spread across his face made her heart flutter like a girl's. "I'll come by at noon on Saturday, then." The town of Clearwater was a day's ride from Tabitha's homestead, a growing settlement with a general store, saloon, church, and a newly built meeting hall where the dance would be held. Ethan arrived precisely at noon on Saturday, his wagon clean and a bundle of blankets ready to keep Tabitha warm during the journey. She emerged from the cabin wearing her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the auburn highlights in her dark hair. She'd pinned it up for the first time since the baby and added a touch of rose water behind her ears. Ethan stared at her for a long moment before remembering to tip his hat. "You look lovely, Tabitha." "Thank you." She smoothed her skirts nervously. "It feels strange, dressing up again." "Strange good or strange bad?" he asked, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. His palm was warm against hers, calloused from work but gentle in its strength. "Strange good, I think," she decided. The journey to town passed quickly as they talked, Ethan pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's early days. When they crested a hill and the settlement came into view, Tabitha felt a surge of excitement that surprised her. It had been months since she'd been around other people, longer still since she'd enjoyed such an occasion. The meeting hall was decorated with harvest bounty sheaves of wheat, pumpkins, apples, and late-blooming wildflowers. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the assembled townsfolk. A small band played lively tunes and couples whirled across the wooden floor. "Mrs. Ashcroft, we'd heard you might be leaving us." Mrs. Thompson, the storekeeper's wife, bustled up as soon as they entered. "So glad to see you out and about." Tabitha felt a moment of panic at the sudden attention, but Ethan's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "I've decided to stay," she said. "Mr. Parker has been kind enough to help me get the homestead in working order." "Has he now, Mrs.?" Thompson's gaze flicked between them, curiosity evident. "Well, isn't that neighborly?" Before the conversation could become more awkward, Ethan touched Tabitha's elbow lightly. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Ashcroft?" She nodded gratefully, and he led her to the floor just as the band struck up a waltz. His hand settled at her waist, firm but respectful, as he guided her into the steps. "I'm a bit rusty," she admitted, focusing on the buttons of his shirt to avoid stepping on his toes. "You're perfect," he murmured, and when she glanced up, startled, the admiration in his eyes made her breath catch. They danced 3 dances in succession, until Tabitha's cheeks were flushed and she needed a break. Ethan fetched them both cups of punch, and they found a quiet corner away from the main crowd. "Thank you for bringing me," she said, watching the dancers. "I'd forgotten what it was like to be around people." "Lonely at your place?" he asked, studying her face. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But it's getting easier." She hesitated, then added softly, "You've made it easier." Something shifted in his expression, a tenderness that made her heart race. But before he could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A man had staggered in, clearly drunk and angry, his voice rising above the music. "Where is she? Where's the widow Ashcroft?" he demanded, shoving past a couple near the door. Tabitha froze, recognizing Thomas Bauer, a rancher who had approached her about buying her land shortly after William's death. She'd refused him then, and apparently he hadn't taken it well. Ethan was on his feet immediately, positioning himself in front of her. "Stay here," he instructed quietly, but Tabitha rose and stood beside him. "I'm here, Mr. Bauer," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "What can I do for you?" Bauer spotted her and stumbled forward, his face flushed with whiskey and anger. "You can sell me that land like any sensible woman would. Ain't right, a female trying to run a ranch alone. You'll fail and you know it." "That's enough, Bauer," Ethan said, his tone hard. "Mrs. Ashcroft isn't alone and her business decisions aren't yours to question." Bauer's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Well, if it ain't Ethan Parker. Should have known you'd be sniffing around a fresh widow. Looking to add to your holdings, are you? Or just to your bedpost?" Tabitha gasped at the crude implication, but Ethan remained calm, though she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Apologize to the lady," he said evenly. "Or what, Cowboy, you'll shoot me. Right here in front of God and everybody," Bauer sneered, swaying on his feet. "No," Ethan replied. "But I will escort you outside and teach you some manners if necessary." Several other men had moved closer, including the sheriff, clearly ready to intervene if needed. Bauer glanced around, realizing he was outnumbered and unwelcome. "Ain't worth my time anyway," he muttered, spitting on the floor before turning to leave. "You'll come crawling to me when winter hits, widow. Mark my words." After he'd gone, the tension in the room gradually dissipated as the band struck up another tune. Tabitha realized she was trembling and sank back onto her bench. "I'm sorry about that," Ethan said, sitting beside her. "Bowers had his eye on your water rights for years. William refused to sell to him too. He's been to the homestead twice since I lost the baby," Tabitha admitted. "I didn't tell you because I handled it myself." Ethan's expression darkened. "He threatened you?" "No, nothing like that. Just made it clear he thought I was foolish to try to make it on my own." She squared her shoulders. "But I'm not on my own anymore, am I?" The anger in his eyes softened to something warmer. "No, you're not." They stayed at the dance a while longer, but the incident had cast a shadow over the evening. By mutual agreement, they decided to head back before it got too late. The night had turned cold, and Ethan tucked the blankets around Tabitha carefully before climbing up beside her. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear night sky. Tabitha found herself stealing glances at Ethan's profile, strong and steady in the moonlight. "Thank you for defending me," she said finally, "though I could have handled Bauer myself." Ethan's mouth quirked up at one corner. "I believe you could." "You're one of the strongest women I've ever known, Tabitha Ashcroft." "I don't feel strong most days," she admitted. "Just stubborn," he chuckled. "Stubborn is good out here. Takes stubbornness to survive." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a comfortable one, filled with unspoken understanding. When they reached her homestead, Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I had a fine time tonight," he said, his voice low in the darkness, despite Bauer's interruption. "So did I." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in for coffee?" Something flickered in his eyes' desire, quickly banked. "Better not. It's late and folks talk." She felt a pang of disappointment but nodded. "Of course. Thank you again for taking me." He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "Sweet dreams, Tabitha." As she watched him drive away, Tabitha pressed her fingers to the spot where he'd touched her, her heart racing with emotions she'd thought long buried. Winter descended on Wyoming with a vengeance that year. December brought blizzards that isolated the homestead for days at a time, but Tabitha was prepared thanks to Ethan's guidance. The barn sheltered her small herd of cattle and horses, and her root cellar was well stocked with preserved foods. Still, the long nights were lonely, filled with memories both bitter and sweet. She found herself thinking of Ethan more and more, his laugh, the way he always seemed to know exactly what she needed before she asked, the strength in his hands when he helped her with chores. During a brief break in the weather just before Christmas, he arrived with firewood, mail that had been waiting in town, and a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Not much," he said gruffly as he handed it to her. "Just thought you might like something for the holiday." Inside was a carved wooden horse, small enough to fit in her palm but detailed with remarkable skill. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth surface. He nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Thought it looked a bit like hope. For your mantle, maybe." "It's beautiful, Ethan. Thank you." Impulsively, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his weathered cheek. His skin was cold from the ride but warmed quickly under her lips. He cleared his throat, eyes darkening with an emotion that made her pulse quicken. "Got something else for you, too." From his coat pocket, he produced a small book. "Poetry. Thought it might help pass the winter evenings." Tabitha opened it to find verses by Tennyson, Wordsworth, and Keats. "How did you know I love poetry?" "You quoted Wordsworth once when we were watching the sunset." "Figured you might enjoy having some verses around." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "I have something for you too," she admitted, fetching a package from her bedroom. Inside was a scarf she'd knitted during the long evenings alone, dark blue wool that brought out the color of his eyes. "Didn't know you could knit," he said, running the soft fabric through his fingers. "There's a lot of things we're still learning about each other," she replied softly. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and desire that neither could deny any longer. Ethan took a step toward her, then stopped, conflict evident in his expression. "Tabitha, he broke off, struggling for words. "I don't want you to think I've been helping you with any expectations." "I know that," she assured him. "You're a good man, Ethan Parker. A man who's falling in love with his neighbor's widow," he said bluntly. "Some might not think that so good." The word love hung in the air between them, both frightening and exhilarating. Tabitha took a deep breath. "And what does the widow think?" That's what I'm afraid to ask." His voice was rough with emotion. "It hasn't been a year since you lost your husband, your child. I know those wounds are still healing." She moved closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "They'll always be part of me," she acknowledged. "William, the baby, they shaped who I am now, but you've helped me see that my heart didn't die with them." Ethan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "Are you saying what I hope you're saying?" "I'm saying I'm not ready to make promises yet," she answered honestly. "But I'm also saying I feel more alive when you're near me than I've felt in a very long time." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I can wait, Tabitha, however long you need." "And if I don't need very long at all," she whispered, feeling bold and terrified all at once. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tender, reverent almost, a question and a promise wrapped in one. When they parted, both were breathless. "Stay for supper," she invited, her hand still resting on his chest where she could feel his heart racing. "The weather's turning again. Could be dangerous riding home." "People will talk," he warned, though his eyes told her he wanted nothing more than to stay. "Let them," she replied with newfound confidence. "We know the truth." The blizzard that night was one of the worst of the season, stranding Ethan at the homestead for 3 days. They passed the time cooking together, reading poetry aloud by the fire and talking of their hopes for the future. He slept on a pallet in the main room, respecting her reputation and her need for time, even as the attraction between them grew stronger. By the time the snow let up enough for him to leave, something fundamental had shifted between them. No longer were they merely neighbors helping each other through hard times. They were two people building something new together, something that honored the past without being shackled by it. As winter gradually yielded to spring, their relationship deepened. Ethan was a frequent visitor to the homestead, and Tabitha occasionally rode to the Triple R, where she was warmly welcomed by the ranch hands who had come to respect her determination. In late March, on the anniversary of her baby's birth and death, Ethan found Tabitha at the small grave, planting wildflowers around the wooden cross. "I thought I might find you here," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "I wanted to make it pretty for her," Tabitha explained, her hands working the soil. "I've been thinking about her all day, what she might have looked like, what kind of person she would have become." "She would have been as strong and beautiful as her mother," Ethan said, helping her plant the delicate blooms. Tabitha smiled through her tears. "Thank you for understanding why I needed to come here today. She'll always be part of you, Tabitha. Part of us, if you'll have me." She looked up at him, this man who had become so essential to her happiness. "What are you saying, Ethan?" He took her soil-stained hands in his. "I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want to build a life with you, here on this land that means so much to you. I'm saying I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night for the rest of our days." Joy blossomed in her chest, as vibrant as the wildflowers they'd just planted. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Parker?" "I am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. "It was my mother's. Not fancy, but it's perfect," she interrupted, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face in his hands. "You've changed my life, Tabitha Ashcroft. I never expected to find love here, but you've made me the happiest man in Wyoming Territory." "And you've taught me that joy can follow sorrow," she replied, leaning into his touch. "That it's possible to honor what was lost while embracing what's found." They were married in May, when the prairie was awash with wildflowers. The ceremony was held in the Clearwater Church, with half the county in attendance. Mrs. Thompson dabbed at her eyes throughout the service, whispering to anyone who would listen that she'd known all along those two were meant for each other. Afterward, there was a celebration at the Triple R, with dancing and feasting that lasted well into the night. Thomas Bauer was notably absent, having finally accepted that the Ashcroft land, soon to be the Parker Ashcroft Ranch, was not for sale at any price. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Ethan led his bride away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. In the distance, they could see their homestead, the barn they'd built together standing strong against the backdrop of mountains. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible again," she replied honestly. "There was a time when I believed my life was over, that all my joy was buried with William and our daughter. But you showed me there can be new beginnings, even after the deepest grief." "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Ethan said, turning to face her. "The barn is finished, the spring planting is done, but there's one more project I've been thinking about." "What's that?" His eyes were serious as he took her hands in his. "A cradle. I thought maybe, in time, you might want to try for a family again. Not to replace what you lost, nothing could ever do that, but to add to our joy." Tabitha felt tears well up, but they were healing tears, not the bitter ones of grief. "I'd like that very much. A cradle for our child to sleep in, brothers or sisters for the baby we'll always keep in our hearts." Ethan pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "We'll tell them about their sister, how she brought us together in a way." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, resting her head against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "We'll tell them how, even in the darkest times, love finds a way to shine through." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, they stood together, no longer two wounded souls seeking comfort, but partners facing the future with hope. The land stretched before them, harsh and beautiful, full of challenges and possibilities. And Tabitha knew, with a certainty that filled her heart to overflowing, that she had found not just a home, but a place to heal, to grow, and to love again. In Ethan's arms, she had found the strength to honor her past while embracing her future. The baby she'd never held would always be a precious memory, but now there was room in her heart for new dreams, new joy, and the promise of tomorrow.